Hello, my name's Rasheen and I'm sick of reading. Hello friends, so today I thought I would do a video that I've seen on BookTube that I thought was really fun, and that is reading 1-star Goodreads reviews of my favourite books. So I did a video ages ago, back at the start of my channel, of my favourite books of all time, which I will link in the cards above. So I've just got a load of reviews off of Goodreads for my favourite books, and I'm going to just read them and see why people hated books that I love. Okay, so let's get into it. To begin with, Wolf Hall. Well, for starters, the writing style took turns irritating and confusing me. Quotation marks are apparently optional, making it hard to figure out that you're reading dialogue until you get to the he said. Speaking of which, the author relies heavily on the pronoun he, and since there was frequently at least 2 men in each scene, this reader was unsure which was the right he. It took so much effort to figure out who was who and who said what and what was going on, it stopped being entertaining or thought-provoking and just became work. This is quite a famous criticism of Hilary Mantel's work, that she uses he or he Cromwell or he himself a lot. I find it helps you to realise the perspective through which you're seeing this book. So you are not inside Cromwell's head, but you are sat on his shoulder. It's a both once a bringing together and a distancing. It helps to remind you that this is historical, and so we cannot truly get inside his mind, but we are seeing things as closely from his perspective as it is possible to do for a historical figure who is not fictional. Someone else said, unless there is some good reason which I can't imagine, this sort of obfuscation is just lazy writing which disrespects the reader. It is purposeful, and I can understand how you would find it distracting if you got confused. I've never struggled to understand what's going on. I think that if you've ever read something like A Clockwork Orange or Trainspotting, which are written in dialect, it's kind of a similar thing where you just have to let your brain shift slightly to understand what's going on. And I think that it is actually a lot harder if you're trying to understand the exact words that are being said, rather than just letting it wash over you. I feel like a lot of readers from this need to just chill. I know Mantel is no Philippa Gregory. Oh my god. Is that meant to be like... Well, she's not Philippa Gregory, so it's going to be... it's not going to be a bland, unresearched melodrama. Must know Tudor history well before picking up the book. Wolf Hall is less a book by which you can learn than a book that substantiates what you already know. I don't know Tudor history that well. I barely knew who Thomas Cromwell was before I read it. I know the basics, and I learned a lot from these books. My initial criticism that Cromwell was the only well-developed character. Aside from Cromwell, there are dozens of minor one-dimensional characters who float out in and out of the story. What? Are you saying Thomas More was not well developed? Are you saying Wolsey and Anne Boleyn and Henry and Mary Boleyn and Japuis are not well developed characters? I honestly don't understand what you're talking about. Even if you'd watched all of the episodes of the Tudors TV show, you'll find yourself utterly confused. Again, refer back to my Philippa Gregory comments. She writes in the present tense, for goodness sake, and the only reason for that is because her subject matter has been done so many times, done to death in fact, that she needs to find a hook to get people interested. That's not the reason. If the only reason was that it was a hook, then it wouldn't work so well. Obviously, it hasn't worked for you, but the reason that she uses present tense is to make it immediate and to make the fact that we know people are going to die, to give us that sense of dramatic irony. It's almost like a play. A play is always written in present tense because it is happening as it happens. And so this is to not give us that, oh, this happened in the past sense, everything is already preordained, but that we are in the middle, and if only these characters would make different decisions, the history that we know would not play out. Next we have The English Patient by Michael Ondaatje. Michael Ondaatje's prose is the literary equivalent of having a gossamer skein repeatedly thrown on your face and then dragged away. Fleeting and insubstantial, but just present enough to be really fucking annoying. Mate, if you're going to write such flowery metaphors in your reviews, I don't really think you have a leg to stand on. By the description on page 1 about the English patient's penis sleeping like a seahorse, and from then on I knew I would not like this book. I finished it complaining about the dialogue and the prose, but I knew that the seahorse penis line tainting my opinion. I still remember the description almost a decade later, and it still bothers me. This description came up a lot in the reviews. People really did not like the sleeping like a seahorse thing. I never quite knew what was going on or what I was supposed to be feeling. There were no characters to really identify with, no plight to be reckoned, and the dialogue was atrocious and the plot was impossible to discern. When I finished the book, I felt confused and slightly violated. I mean, if that's how you feel, but there were no characters to identify with. Is that really the mark of great literature, that you can see yourself in the book? I thought reading was about getting yourself outside of yourself. Pretentious, flawed, and strangely sympathetic to the Nazis over the Allies. I think you've misread this book. Definitely not sympathetic to the Nazis, just also pointing out that probably shouldn't nuclear bomb places. I gave this book 1 star because I did not know what was going on for 75% of the book. It's full of frilly metaphors and poetic prose. It was so boring that I cannot believe I finished it. Well, if you don't know what's going on for 75% of it, then you can't really say you were bored. You just didn't understand, because if you understood, maybe you wouldn't be bored. Not liking the title character really hampered this book. Again, do you have to like characters in order to like a book? I guess some people do, but I really feel like unless it's like romance or something where you're supposed to be rooting for the main character, I don't think in literary fiction you need to like anyone. The backstories are more interesting than the real story. The majority of the book is breathing in and out of different flashbacks for each character. Each character has an amazing backstory. Yeah, the backstory is the story, hun. We are discovering the mystery through the backstory. The main thing is the setting, and the backstory is the story. It seems to be most people are like, nothing happens, which I love. The writer didn't use quotation marks, so it was difficult to tell who was saying things when. Just use context. She should have given him enough morphine to put him out of his misery so they could all get on with their lives. Really didn't like the insinuation that the Americans were racist towards the Japanese during World War II by dropping the big one on them. Are we forgetting who attacked whom first? Yes, a standard bomb on a military base is exactly the same as a nuclear bomb on a civilian city that is still having ramifications today. Regeneration by Pat Barker. It fails to connect the reader with the horrors of the war. It fails to present convincing portrayals of historical figures it borrows. It fails to provide insight into the psychology of returning soldiers. It fails to present any sort of meaningful, cogent, philosophical statement aside from war sucks. I think it's an exploration on masculinity and the ways that mental health affects men differently, especially in that time period when hysteria was considered a woman's disease, and the way that masculinity and sexuality affected men. Much more complex than just war sucks. I feel like you've missed a lot. The reader is presented with a roll call of things that are bad that could happen to soldiers, without being the opportunity to connect or sympathise with any of the patients. This approach has an almost desensitising effect, which I believe is the exact opposite of what Barker attempted to accomplish with the novel. I think it's exactly what Barker intended to accomplish with the novel. It's desensitising because war desensitises people, and because the desensitisation of society and their reaction to soldiers returning with PTSD is one of the themes of the novel. The fact that there are so many, the sheer volume of terrible things that have happened to so many people, and the way that the society is so cold towards them. The second book is about conscientious resistors and the way that they were treated, the torture that they were put through by the British government. That is exactly the point. So I guess if you want mawkish melodrama, you'll have to read something else. Reviewers praise Barker's spare writing, but in actuality it's flat, unimaginative, undramatic, and fails to hold the reader's interest. That is, unless you like the pseudoscience of psychiatry. Yes, I think if you think psychiatry is a pseudoscience, this probably isn't the one for you, but I'm also not going to trust your review. There should be a rule about writing novels about the world wars if you have nothing of interest to say. We get it, war is bad. The point was made by people who actually lived through it. Most people are aware of the horrors of the First World War from reading novels about it and then studying it at school. This novel is just a retread of far better books. I think that Regeneration was written because there are a lot of people who romanticise war and want to talk about the heroism and greatness of soldiers at war, and they want to ignore the very real lived human reality of that. And it is also, as I said before, a discussion of masculinity and the relation between masculinity and mental health, which is a very current problem considering 4 times as many men commit suicide than women. Kind of gratuitous and no closure for most of the storylines. It's a trilogy. Next, one of my favourites from last year, and that is The Mermaid and Mrs Hancock. A note to any fans of fantasy like me who are tempted to pick this book up because the mention of a mermaid intrigues you: don't. The mermaid barely features, and the elements of magical realism are severely underused in general. They only really have effect on the last 20% or so of the book, and barely that at all, fizzling into nothing in the last few pages. Yeah, a lot of the complaints of this one were like, I was expecting mermaids, where are the mermaids? There are no mermaids. Some people really thought there were literally no mermaids and didn't seem to grasp the ending at all. But yeah, the mermaids are kind of a metaphor. They are there, but they are kind of a metaphor, and it is much more magical realism than fantasy. So if you were going into this expecting like a story about mermaids, then this is not the book for you. Full of horrid and loathsome characters, none of whom seem to have anything interesting to redeem their horribleness. Brimming with affected pseudo-literary ideas, meaningless volumes of tis and twas all over, without extending the treatment to the rest of the language. Every character's voice is completely interchangeable. I didn't find that, but I can see if you did how that would be annoying. The idea of using just some of the dated language and not all of it is to give a sense of what is going on without making it incomprehensible to a modern reader or more like a chore to a modern reader. So, for example, in the same way that Wolf Hall is not written completely in Shakespearean, it's a very fine line to walk, and I can tell if you wanted more, then you would find that difficult, but I thought it was a perfect balance. And also horrible characters, again. This thing about having to like everyone. Although I did like Angelica Neal, but I feel like some people need characters to be like perfect in order to like them. They can't like anyone with any sort of flaws. The whole story was painful. There was no excitement, no anticipation, no guessing, and no building of a story. There's a dead mermaid and no Mrs Hancock, and that only just changes towards the end of the book. Most of the book is listening to prostitutes thinking that they are better than what they are. Yeah, if you're going to insult sex workers, again, not the book for you. The work itself has no plot structure, no focus. We don't even know who Mrs Hancock is until halfway into the book, for example. So, there are no major plot events and just a huge heap of small, seemingly unrelated events or non-events following each other. Scenes are very drawn out and over-described for the sake of historical accuracy, which adds very little to the reader's enjoyment. Added to my enjoyment. None of the characters are likeable or even interesting. Again, with the likeable characters, Christ, all these people need to read Roxane Gay's essay on likeability in fiction, and why likeability is not something we apply to men. The Essex Serpent. I didn't feel I got to know Cora and didn't particularly like any of the cast. This was more of a love triangle than anything, although the purpose of the book still eludes me. Again, liking the cast is a running theme. The purpose of the book is an exploration of passion, of mass hysteria, of science versus religion. I couldn't connect with the characters or didn't like or care about anyone, and this isn't generally a problem for me for a novel once the plot has enough suspense or mystery to keep me engaged and guessing. Okay, so you either want a thriller or likeable characters, and you don't read literary fiction then. Perry has created such an utterly unlikable main character in Cora. Why three of the other characters have abiding passion for her is completely inexplicable, and then this just goes on to be incredibly rude about Cora in quite a sexist way. She just wants to be a man, she's always thinking like a man, that's so boring. The author seems to be trying for a poetic style of prose which I found amateurish. If you're going to employ so many similes for describing landscape, then you really need to hit the mark or try another style. Perry was evoking Gothic and other Victorian literature, which writes in this way. If you read Thomas Hardy or Charles Dickens or Gothic novels in general, you will find this style there, and that was the reasoning for the similes. For me, it was grating and claustrophobic. It also fails to be a period piece, as there are way too many annoying anachronisms. Again, that was kind of the point. They're not anachronisms as in things that didn't exist then happen. It's more anachronisms of personality, and the point is that Victorian people were not like people in Victorian novels, and a lot of our understanding of Victorian people comes from Christian Victorian propaganda and early 20th century ideas of what the Victorians were like. A lot of people think the Victorians were entirely unsexed, but the pornographic drawings of the time, there is a lot of sexuality and passion in the Victorian period. Our idea of the Victorian period is kind of a caricature, and the reason that these people don't seem like the people in Victorian novels is part of the reason. People in Victorian times were like people now. People are not that different. Cora is the heroine of the novel, but the author has given her some feminist qualities. Yeah, if you're putting feminist in quotation marks, I'm not really going to listen to you. The Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter. First of all, the stories weren't particularly groundbreaking unless you count adding a bunch of sex into fairy tales. Groundbreaking. Carter is bringing into light the implicit sexuality of fairy tales by making that sexuality explicit. Fairy tales are about sex and sexuality a lot of the time, and about controlling women's sexuality, and Carter is taking women out of that control and letting them take control of their own sexuality. Yes, a lot of the girls are underage, but that's kind of about the tropes of fairy tale. For the most part, the story stuck to the original source material, really only deviating to add sex or death or both. Not that either were particularly graphic, but just enough to be uncomfortable for those who don't like sexual content in their literature. Yeah, if you don't like sexual content in your literature, then I would avoid this book. And by the way, I have to mention the fact that so many of the reviews of this book rave about the feminist undertones of the stories, and I want to know in what world anyone sees these stories as feminist. The female characters aren't more empowered than the originals. They still fall in love with stupid men, allow themselves to be doormats, are shallow, vain, and only seem to care about clothes and money. The only thing feminist about it is that it definitely paints men in a bad light. Okay, painting men in a bad light is not feminist, necessarily, and feminism doesn't mean, oh, the women in this are great. It can mean that this work is commenting on the position of women in society. It can mean that this book is talking about the ways that children are sexualized, about girl children are sexualized, or the ways that the world controls women's sexuality and cares so much about purity and virginity, which is a big theme in here. The women in it doesn't have to be, oh, these characters are empowered, strong, fighty women. It's about the themes and what the book is focusing on, what it is commenting on, the points that it is making. It is not about the characters in the books being kick-ass women. That's kind of missing the point. The Secret History by Donna Tart. What a load of pretentious bum poo. Fair enough. I've never read more bland writing style in my life, regardless of plot. Well, lack thereof. I can't even characterise Tart's writing to give examples because, like the rest of her book and characters, it has no personality. The only instances that were atmospheric would be when she described the Vermont's landscape. But that's the setting of the book. That doesn't deserve praise because she can describe snow. That's the bare minimum. A lot of writers would kill to be able to describe snow the way that Tart does. 500 pages of a bunch of classist, pretentious assholes drinking and smoking and talking about how superior they are for studying ancient Greek. Yeah, that's the point. Surely a book that puts Greek writing and philosophy at the forefront of its themes should offer some insight into Greek writing and philosophy. The characters are supposedly in love with it all, but aside from name-dropping a bit of ancient literature every now and then, the book never even attempts to illustrate exactly what it is exactly about the culture that drives them to the extremes. That is the point. These people claim to be in love with and obsessed with this thing, but they have only the barest, shallowest knowledge of it. Obviously, they are studying it, so it is a greater knowledge than other people. Obsession with it is more an obsession with themselves, an obsession with their own relations, with their own relationships, and an obsession with their own superiority. It's not really about Greek philosophy. It could be anything. It is chosen to be Greek philosophy and literature because this represents a classist world, like it's called classics. It's kind of on the nose, but it is also studied by people of the upper classes mostly and was used to separate classes. You could only be considered to be educated if you had a classical education, and so that's kind of the point. I had a hard time reconciling characters that were in college in the 1990s with fashion, speech and actions more reminiscent of young people in the 1920s. Yeah, this novel is kind of a pastiche of 1920s campus novels, and also these people want to believe themselves to be above it by being in the classes. They idealise that 1920s thing, which is very common. I mean, when Brideshead Revisited came out on television, people were obsessed with it and were dressing like it and were trying to talk like these people, even though these people in Brideshead Revisited, as well as in The Secret History, are terrible. It's a comment on that sort of thing. To the abysmal dialogue, which reads like it was picked out of the trash cutting room floor of a low-budget period film. The point is that these people are talking in that way. They are fake. They are... it's not real. None of them are expressing real emotions or anything. They are using this trappings of a certain understanding of class, of intellectualism, to present a front, and they are never going beneath the surface. They think they are so deep, but they are entirely pretentious and surface level. Skip it and read Looking for Alaska. Fuck. The Poisonwood Bible by Barbara Kingsolver. America is an evil power of which we should all be ashamed. False again. I cannot deny mistakes have been made in American foreign policy, and certainly events of the Congo, as presented in this book, would appear to be that way. But there are also many things America has done that are good, such as preserving freedom for those who live here to write books ripping on America, and these shouldn't be ignored. A lot of the reviews of the Poisonwood Bible are angry Americans upset that it talks about bad things that America did. It seems like if you say anything America did was wrong, you get a lot of people's backs up. It's talking about specifically American foreign policy in the Congo, and they're like, well, you need to say all of the good things that America does, or else you can't say anything bad about America. It's like, but it's very specific. It's very specific. And God, when people write books about the Nazis, you don't expect them to go, yes, but Germany has also done very good things. But Germany has done very good things, as well as Nazis. And America has good things, as well as terrible foreign policy for the last 100 years. This book is terrible, and yet I continue to plough through. I'm not sure why, other than an exercise in small and constant sacrifices, like some kind of immolation I subject myself to, trial by fire. Actually, it's more like water torture with these small meaningless strips that could drive you mad. People really love to be very flowery in their reviews. I'm just like, you complain about the flowery language and then you go off. First-person accounts of 5 female characters who all essentially sound like the same person, and the one male character doesn't get his own perspective shown to the reader. Oh, boo-hoo! A book with multiple perspectives and none of them is a man. This story is very similar to The Mosquito Coast in that it is a Western family dropped into a savage and primitive land that they are not prepared for in the slightest. You've missed the point of this book, haven't you? Much of this book is leftist propaganda, especially at the end. Okay, so that is all of the 1-star reviews of my favourite books. I think it can be mostly summed up as, I didn't understand this was boring, nothing happened, the writing is pretentious, and they used too much punctuation. Those are all of my books. Oh, and the characters were unlikable. So that's what I apparently like in books. I hope I haven't been too mean. I'm sure these people are very nice people, and they have books that they like, except for the people who use feminist like this or put the R word in their reviews. They can go to hell. Let me know in the comments below if you've ever read any reviews by someone who hated a book you loved and how that felt for you, and how you feel about reading reviews in general. I don't generally do it very much, so I would love to hear your opinions. Thank you for watching. Please give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and remember to subscribe because I put out new videos every Tuesday, Thursday and Saturday. Thank you for watching. Bye bye!